The sharp scrape of silverware still haunted Wendy Marlowe, even 10 years removed from that graduation dinner. She sat on her living room couch on a rainy weeknight, a thick, cream-colored reunion invitation resting on her coffee table, its glossy paper catching the faint glow from her desk lamp. Rain tapped steadily against the bedroom window, and for a second her mind slipped backward, pulled straight into that loud, overcrowded banquet hall. She could hear the clatter of plates, the boisterous chatter of 18-year-olds celebrating the end of high school. Someone at the long dinner table had teased that Corey Hale and she were childhood sweethearts, a dumb throwaway joke born from them growing up next door to each other. Before she could even flush or laugh it off, Corey slammed his fork hard against his ceramic plate. The loud crack cut through the noise. His face twisted with open disgust, and his voice carried far enough for half the table to hear. "Are you insane? Who'd like a whale like Wendy? I hang out with her out of pity." The whole table burst into rough, roaring laughter. Hot shame flooded Wendy's face. Her ears burned. She stared down at her uneaten food, unable to lift her eye. Off to the side, Carter Bennett, their class president, had frowned deep. He said nothing. He just sat there, his jaw watching the crowd laugh at her expense. No one stepped. No one defended. That moment had seared itself into her memory, a weight she had carried ever since. Wendy blinked hard, snapping herself back to her present day. Her fingers brushed the edge of the reunion. 10 years since that humiliating night. She had barely spoken to Corey Hale after graduation. She moved away from college, built a steady market career, made close friends, and tried to leave that small-town cruelty. But old wounds did not always. Her phone vibrated on the wooden tape. It was Lila Reyes, her best friend since college, shooting her a quick text. "Did the reunion invite final?" "Don't tell me you're thinking of." Wendy huffed a quiet breath, typing a short. "It's here. I haven't." She set the phone down and wandered over to her front window, pulling back the rain streaked glass. This was the same suburban Ohio town she'd been. She had moved back 2 years prior to work. She rarely crossed paths with people from her house. Most days it felt like that cruel dinner had happened to. 20 minutes later, she grabbed her rain jacket and headed out to grab groceries from the neighborhood. The parking lot glistened wet on nights. She pushed her shopping cart toward the entrance, head down, thinking over whether she should toss the reunion invitation straight. When she pulled open the heavy door, she nearly collided with him walking out. He held a paper grocery bag slung over one arm, sharp-featured, well-dressed, easy, confident smiles. Time seemed for Wendy. He looked polished, exactly the successful local real estate agent everyone had. His eye landed on her, and for a heartbeat a flicker of surprise face. Then his charming public persona slid back into place, like that terrible graduation night had never did at all. "Wendy, wow, it's been forever," Corey said warmly, as if they were old acquaintances. He set his grocery bag down for a second, holding out one shake. "I heard you back into town. How have you been?" Wendy was where she stood. Her pulse picked up speed. All of those buried feelings from that dinner came rushing back, uninvited. She stared at outstretched hand. Every cruel word he had spoken at that long-ago tale echoed in her head. He acted as though he had never publicly torn her a laugh. A few other shoppers drifted the doorway. The hum of refrigeration units rumbled from inside the store. Wendy felt her throat tighten. She had not prepared for this. She thought she would get more time to process the reunion invitation before she ran face to face. Corey tilted his head, still smiling. Response. The rain kept falling outside, and Wendy recalled cold clarity. The past was no longer locked in her memories. It was standing right in front of her, in the flesh. Wendy stood frozen in the supermarket doorway, rain mist swirling around her ankles. Corey's hand hung in the space between them, open and expectant, his easy smile never faltering. Every muscle in her body screamed to turn and walk away, yet part of her hesitated, afraid of drawing stares from passing strangers. She forced her fingers into his palm for the briefest, most hollow handshake imaginable. His grip was firm, casual, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside her. "Good," Wendy managed, her voice thinner than she intended. "I've been doing fine." Corey pulled his hand back, slinging his grocery bag higher on his shoulder. He leaned against the doorframe, settling into relaxed small talk, as if they were catching up after a pleasant summer apart, instead of survivor in person who humiliated her in front of their entire graduating class. "Heard you took a marketing position downtown," Corey said. "That's awesome. I've been doing real estate locally, keeping busy. Reunion invite hit your place yet?" "I'm planning on going. Should be fun seeing everyone again." Wendy's chest grew tight. "Fun. That word landed heavy. For her, high school had been laced with quiet shame, much of it tied directly to him. She nodded vaguely, eyes drifting past him toward the brightly lit aisles of the store. She wanted this conversation over. Before she could make an excuse to slip inside, a familiar voice called from across the parking lot. Carter Bennett was climbing out of a beat-up dark sedan, an insulated canvas tote slung over his shoulder. He paused mid-stride when he spotted them both by the entrance. Even from several yards away, Wendy noticed that same faint furrow between his brows she remembered from the graduation bank. Carter walked over, his steps slow and deliberate. He gave Corey a polite but distant, then turned toward. There was recognition in his gaze, not the performative warmth Corey wore like a costume. Wendy, hi. I didn't know you shot her. Carter. Just picking up a few things. Corey jumped in immediately, smooth and gregarious, attempting to own the whole exchange. Can you running into two old classmates on one rainy night. Small right? Carter only hummed an eye. He did not engage with Corey's light-hearted banter. Wendy sensed he held something unspoken, something linked back to that terrible dinner. Still, he said nothing about it loud, not in this public spot with other shoppers wandering. After another minute of hollow pleasantries, Corey checked, muttering something about a client follow email. He set his eyes and headed toward his parked. Once he was out of shot, the tension drained a little from Wendy. She let out a quiet breath she had not realized chilling. Carter shifted his tote from one shoulder. He really acts like none of that high school garbage ever happened. Wendy's head snim. She had not expected him to name it suddenly. Rain continued to patter on the asphalt. You remember that night, she said. Half statement. I do, Carter admitted, tone low. I've never forgotten it. I sat there and it happened, and I did absolutely nothing. I've carried that regret. Guilt in his voice, and Wendy felt a strange twist in her stomach. For a decade she had told herself everyone had forgotten, that only she carried the scar of those cruel words. To hear another person acknowledge it out loud unsettled her. She did not know what to make of his long silence, or his presence. They talked for a few more minutes, standing under the thin overhang of fence. Carter told her he managed programs for a local youth nonprofit. He mentioned he also had received the reunion invitation, and he was still debating whether he would attend. Eventually they exchanged phone numbers, a cautious gesture, no grand promises attached. Once they parted ways, Wendy finished her grocery run, but she could barely focus on her list. Back home, she dumped her bags on the kitchen counter. Lila, her best friend, picked up mid-shift at the hospital. Background noise of beeping monitor on the line. Wait, you ran into Corey? And Carter Bennett? Lila said, sharp in her voice. The class president who just... That's the one, Wendy said, leaning at the refrigerator. He says he's felt... Lila. Regret is nice, but regret doesn't what you went through. Still, this reunion is going to be messy. You should go. Not for them, for you. Stop letting that know away. Wendy paced across her kitchen floor. Part of her wanted to burn the invitation and pretend none of this existed. Another tired of running. Corey got to walk through town as a successful agent, while she still had old memories. Should she be the one hiding? By the time she hung up with Lila, the rain off drizzle. She walked back into the living room and stared down at the glossy reunion coffee table. Mind was not made up yet, but the possibility of showing up self inside her. Even if she went, she knew Corey would try to write off his cruelty as nothing more than jokes. She could already hear it, that loomed over her. Whatever choice she made, there was no going back to the quiet ignorance she had enjoyed before running into Core Market doorway. Wendy slept poorly that night. Fragments of the graduation dinner memory looped through her dreams, clattering forks, loud laughter, Corey's sharp cutting words. When her alarm went off Tuesday morning, her shoulders stayed tight, heavy with unresolved stress. She sipped cold coffee at her kitchen counter and stared again at the reunion invitation. Every part of her nervous system screamed to stay home, yet Lila's words kept circling in her head. Why should she be the one hiding? By mid-afternoon, she pulled out her phone and texted Carter. She kept the message short, no big emotional speech. I'm thinking about going to the reunion, not sure what to expect. His reply came 30 minutes later. I've been weighing the same choice. If you go, I'll go too. I won't make any big scenes, but I won't stand quiet again. Reading that made Wendy's throat feel tight. It was not a promise to fix everything for her. It was only a promise not to look away. That small difference mattered. Later that week, she ran into Corey at a local coffee shop downtown. He was sitting at a high wooden table with another real estate coworker, laptop open in front of him. When he spotted her walking in, He waved her over before she could turn toward the far counter. There was no escape. She crossed the room and stopped beside his table. Corey closed his laptop partially and smiled, casual and easy. His coworker excused himself to grab a refill, leaving the two of them alone. "Heard you're considering the reunion," Corey said right away. "Man, high school was such a wild time. We all said dumb stuff back then. I hope none of that old silly garbage still bothers." Wendy's fingers curled into loose fists at her sides. There, the deflection she had anticipated. He packaged public humiliation as harmless teenage nonsense, acting as if the damage had been her. "Nothing worth holding." "Silly garbage to me," Wendy said, keeping her voice steady, not raising it. "That dinner night hurt a lot more than you seem." Corey's smile faltered for Hound. He leaned back in his chair, adopting a wounded tone, like he was the one receiving unfair. "Whoa, hey, I never meant anything quiet. It was just table banter. Everybody was messing around that night. I would never want to actually." Wendy bit back the sharp retort burned on her tongue. Arguing here in the busy coffee shop would only play in. Other patrons glanced over, curious about the quiet tension. She did not want to give him the chance to paint her as overreacting, bitter, unable to let old high school. "People can get hurt even when mean to," she answered flatly. "I'm not here to reach it right now. I just wanted you to know I'm going to the reunion. I'd appreciate it if you kept old mocking comments to yourself." Corey's expression hardened for a moment, before he smoothed it back into charm. He lifted both hands in a placating gesture. "Of course, no problem. Walk bridge." His word agreeable. Yet Wendy did not believe him. She turned and walked away to coffee order. She had set her boundary out loud, but Corey had not truly accepted responsibility. He had only agreed to go. That evening, Lila. She told her best friend about the coffee shop run-in and the boundary she owned. Lila supported her choice but warned her not to trust Corey's promises. "He will twist things that benefits him," Lila cautioned over the phone. "Stay alert. I'm taking time off work that night. I'm coming to that reunion with you. Got your back." Rushed over Wendy. Knowing Lila would be beside her took her chest. A day later, Carter texted Wendy again. He told her he had been thinking about graduation dinner, how Corey had told other kids too, her. Back in high school, Corey used teasing to climb social status, picking on anyone less cool. That new piece of information shifted Wendy's perspective. She had always thought he was personal, at her. Now she understood as part of a pattern. Still, knowing it was a pattern did not erase how deeper. As the reunion weekend drew near, worked for an outfit. She picked something that made her founded and confident, not something worn to impress old classmates. She practiced quiet, firm lines in her head for if she crossed her limits again. She refused to arrive for a screaming fight. She was ready to protect herself. She was no past, walking straight toward it. But as she folded her noose across the end of her bed, Jin lingered. Would her boundaries actually hold once they were surrounded by the noise and old group dynamic school peer group? The night of the 10-year reunion arrived soft and humid. The venue was a banquet hall on the edge of town, the same building where their graduation dinner had unfolded a decade before. Wendy's fingers tightened around the strap of her small crossbody bag as Lila pulled into the parking lot. Strings of warm fairy lights glowed behind the large windows, and the low thrum of pop-era background music drifted out through partially open doors. Wendy stared at the familiar brick walls. Just pulling into this lot dragged her brain straight back to that terrible graduation night. Lila reached over and gave her forearm a quick, reassuring squeeze. "Breathe. We leave whenever you want. No questions, no arguments," Lila said. They stepped inside. The room hummed with chatter, clinking wine glasses and scattered laughter. Former classmates milled about, hugging one another, commenting on jobs, marriages, kids. Name tags hung from lanyards around every neck. Wendy scanned the crowd automatically. It did not take long to spot Corey. He stood near the bar, surrounded by a small circle of old friends, laughing loud and easy. Dressed in a sharp button-down shirt, he moved through conversations like a natural host. Every few seconds, someone clapped him on the shoulder. His polished real estate persona was on full display. For most people in this room, he was still the popular boy from high school. Carter showed up a few minutes after. He gave Wendy a small, steady nod across the room, then drifted toward a group of former student government peers. For the first hour, Wendy stayed close to Lila. They caught up with a handful of kinder classmates, talked about careers and life outside this small town. For a little while, the heavy weight of old memory faded. Then the event coordinator tapped Lila on the shoulder. A nursing colleague she had known in community college was across the room and needed to speak with her urgently. Lila shot Wendy an apologetic. "I'll be 5 minutes tops. Stay where I see you." Wendy nodded, forcing a smile. Lila walked away, melting into the alone. Wendy drifted toward the far edge of the day. Several old classmates wandered over, and the conversation slowly circled back to high school. Someone brought up the graduation dinner. A woman laughed, shook her head. Man, that dinner was wild. Remember when Corey roasted Wendy right at the table? Whole table lost it. A couple of people chuckled. No malice hung their tone. They treated it like a silly, funny anecdote in their youth. Wendy's stomach did tight. It was not to her, yet for everyone else it had hardened into a harmless party story. She tried to correct gently. That moment wasn't funny for me. It really hurt, her words landed awkwardly. This faded. Shrugged. Oh, come on, it was just dumb ribbing. Everybody got... Another person quickly changed the subject, steering the talk to prom night. They did not want with her pain. They only wanted to celebrate nostalgic good times. Wendy stood there, isolatable again. She had acted indifference, but this casual dismissal stung deeper for. Corey had noted all exchange. He watched her beside the bar, his example. He did not step over to apologize, nor did her openly. Wendy searched for Lila, but her best friend was still stuck on the opposite side of the hall, hemmed in. Car was also occupied, deep in with a group. For the moment, Wendy had no hand. She slipped toward the back hallway, stepping out of the noisy banquet room glare. The hallway was quiet, only faint music seeping through closed double doors. She leaned against a plaster wall, chest rattling fast. All her careful planning not accounted for this, the way collective nostalgia harm. She had set firm boundaries, but she could not force other pain. The door behind her. Wendy spun around, shoulders tensed, half expecting Corey. Instead it was Carter. He had seen her slip out, and excused himself from to follow. Are you okay? He asked, voice low. Wendy shook her head, the floor. They tell that funny story. Knows how damaging it was. Carter beside her. Most of these folks only remember what feels good to them. They don't want to unpack of high school. Through the thick doors, laughter and music continued to swell. Wendy had faced Corey. She had not realized she would also have to push against the whole group's comfortable sand of the past. Even if Corey kept his promise and never said a cruel word all night, the old wound was the same. Somewhere inside the main hall went up. The reunion party rolled on without them. Wendy understood now. Her biggest risk was not Corey's direct insults. It was the quiet, unthinkfulness of everyone else. She straightened her posture. She could leave right now. That was still an option, but leaving would mean letting this room's nostalgic lie go unchallenged. Choice weighed heavy on her shoulders. Wendy lingered in the dim hallway, the thump of party music muffled behind the heavy double doors. Leaving felt tempting. She could grab her coat, slip out to the parking lot, and drive home, letting the reunion and all its old ghosts stay behind her. But something inside her refused to run. She had not come this far just to hide in a corridor and surrender the room to nostalgia-washed lies. She drew a long, slow breath, pushed off the plaster wall, and headed back inside. Carter fell into step beside her, not crowding her, simply walking at her side. The noise crashed over them the second the doors swung open. Glasses clinked, people laughed, colored string lights glinted across every face. The evening was winding toward its final hours. A small cluster had gathered near the bar, Corey at its center, holding a half-filled glass of beer. Voices rose loud enough to carry across the floor. Hey, remember graduation dinner? One of his old buddies called out to the group, grinning. When Corey roasted Wendy so hard the whole table lost? Corey chuckled, tipping his glass. He did not shout, but his voice carried clearly over the surrounding chat. Man, I was brutal back then. Poor girl, I gave her such a hard time. It was light, playful, delivered for cheap laughs. It repeated the old insult, framed it as a funny high school anecdote for the crowd. Wendy froze midst. All eyes in that little circle turned toward. Heat flooded her neck and this was exactly what she had warned him against. He had given his word, and he had broken it right in front of her. For a heartbeat, the room went quiet around their small... Wendy's throat. She braced herself to argue, ready to state plainly how hurtful his joke. Before she could speak, Carter moved. That wasn't brutal fun, Carter said, his voice steady, loud enough for the whole circle to hear. That was public humiliation. People don't just laugh that off 10 years later. A murmur rippled through the group. Corey's easy stopped. He set his beer down hard on the bar top, eyes flicking between Carter and the other. Oh, on, Corey tested. It was just a joke. No one meant real harm. Why are you blowing this out of proportion? Because one person's joke can be another person's lasting trauma. He glanced toward Wendy, making sure he was not sitting over her, then turned back. And this was one-off. Corey picked on multiple kids back then to make him. Several faces in the crowd shifted surprise. Some people had never stopped the pattern. A few exchanged unseen glances. The warm, playful energy around. Lila finally put through the crowd, spotting Wendy's tense posture and rough. She laid a hand gently on Wendy's upper arm, solid, coercive. His charm completely. Come on, you're everything. We were teenagers. Up. One thing. Wendy woke up at last, her voice and calm. No screaming, no hysterics. Treating someone's pain as entertainment, even now, is something entirely. I asked not to do this tonight. A few of their former classmates drifted from the bar, uncomfortable with the sharp turn taken. Others stayed, watching silently. Corey could not utter a good comeback. He shook his head, grabbed his jacket off a nearby chair, and stormed toward the egg. The door shut behind him. The bubble of light-heartedness popped. The whole group dispersed, people scattering to other banquet hall. Once Corey was gone, the tea ebbed. Lila pulled me aside for a moment, checking up. Carter stayed nearby, keeping distance. Later, the three of them found a quiet, empty table toward the back of the room, from the bar noise. Carter remembered. Back in high school, Corey helped quiet kids, mocked anyone who standing. That graduation dinner was a public example. Most students had looked away, too afraid to risk their own social status to step in. Carter admitted his own guilt burned deepest because he held government influence, and when truth. For years she had believed he was uniquely targeted, that there was something wrong with her cruelty. Now she understood she had just been one of many convenient targets of popularity. That knowledge lightened a small piece of her burden, yet it did not erase the years married. The reunion continued around them, music still playing, but the night could never go back to harmless nostalgia. The ugly, unspoken part of their high school past had been dragged out into open view for several old peers to witness. Wendy glanced toward the front where Corey had vanished. He had left. This was far from finished. He would go back into town, back to his real estate circles, and he would tell his own version of tonight's event. Wendy knew that. Feel more conflict coming. In the days right after the reunion, small ripples spread across their old high school alumni social media group. Word of what happened at the banquet hall bounced between text threads, casual coffee shop conversations, and private direct messages. Corey wasted no time shaping the narrative to favor himself. He told people he had made a harmless, nostalgic joke, that Wendy had overreacted, and that Carter had unfairly ganged up on him out of some long-held grudge. Some former classmates bought into that framing. A handful posted vague comments in the alumni Facebook group about letting old teenage mistakes stay in the past, suggesting everyone should move on. A few even privately messaged Wendy to tell her she was making too big a fuss over something that happened 10 years ago. Each message landed like a tiny stone tossed against her chest. Wendy tried not to scroll through the group feed, but curiosity got the better of her late one weeknight. Reading those comments pulled all the old insecurity surging right back up. The weight of that graduation dinner night settled heavy on her again. She stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, and the old, critical inner voice woke up. The same voice Corey had fed all those years ago. What if you really are overreacting? What if you are still the girl everyone laughed at? She called Lila for support, but her best friend was stuck on a brutal night shift at the hospital. Pages of medical charts stacked up, and Lila could only send short, hurried text replies between patient checks. There was no long, comforting phone call waiting for Wendy that night. For the first time since the reunion, she felt genuinely alone. Carter reached out, checking. He told Wendy he had seen some of the one-sided chatter circulate. He warned her that Corey was working hard to paint himself as the wronged party. Carter could not fix other people's opinions for him. He could only offer to listen. It was not a magic solution, and Wendy felt the gap between support and real relief. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Wendy took a long drive through the old suburban streets where she had grown. She passed Corey's childhood, the same neighborhood where they had lived next door to one. The familiar siding and front lawn stirred up wave after wave of memory. She pulled over to park on a quiet side engine and let herself sit with all the tangled. She had gone to the reunion expecting her main fight to be against the man who had spoken those cruel words. Now she understood the harder battle lived inside her own head. Corey's public insult had planted a seed years ago, and she had watered it for a decade, second-guessing her worth, shrinking herself to avoid drawing. Even if every single person in town believed her side of the story, That internal wound would not vanish. That realization. For so long, she had imagined true healing would arrive the moment Corey gave her a sincere apology. But what if he never apologized at all? What if he spent the rest of his life convinced he had done nothing wrong? Where would he leave her? When she got home, she sat down on her living room couch and jotted down messy notes. She wrote out exactly what that graduation dinner moment her. Not for anyone to read, but she wrote about avoiding swimsuits, about turning down dates out of fear of being mocked, about how quick she was to shrink back in things. Seeing all of it written on paper made the scope of the damage impossible to deny. It was not just a bad night. It was years of quiet, self-protective choices shaped by one cruel. A new message popped up from a former high school girl The woman wrote that Corey had also mocked her relentless sophomore year, and she had seen the reunion discussion online and wanted Wendy to tell her. That small message brought a fragile of comfort, yet it did not erase the deep fatigue settling over bones. The conflict was no longer of her. It lived within. She could win every argument against Corey, and carry the shame, unless she learned how. Outside her windows, gray rain was her notebook. She knew she could not force remorse from Corey. She could not force the whole town to see things exactly her way. But she could stop waiting for their build. That shift in thinking felt fragile, untested, hurt her. She had spent so many years waiting for something better. Now it looked like that all to her. Wendy spent the following week slowly untangling the old patterns inside herself. She stopped scrolling the alumni group whenever the urge hit, deleting the bookmark so she could not easily click back in. She kept her notebook close, occasionally writing down intrusive thoughts when the old shame flared up, refusing to let those unkind inner voices go unchallenged. Her goal was no longer to make Corey beg for forgiveness. It was to stop handing him power over how she saw herself. Carter met her for coffee one weekday evening. The cafe hummed with low conversation, espresso machines hissing in the background. They sat at a small corner table, mugs steaming between them. He brought his own heavy memory of the graduation dinner, describing how he had sat frozen, afraid that speaking up would ruin his clean-cut class president reputation. I told myself staying quiet was keeping the peace, Carter said, stirring sugar into his black coffee. I was just protecting my own social standing. That's all it was, Wendy listened. His honesty did not erase the pain of that night, but it softened something inside her. For years, she had assumed everyone else had watched and laughed along. Now she understood some people had simply been trapped by fear. Still, she made it clear to him that remorse could not rewrite what had already happened. I appreciate you seeing it, Wendy said. But healing isn't going to come from other people feeling bad for me. I'm trying not to live waiting for apologies that might never arrive. Carter nodded, respecting that boundary. He did not push to fix her hurt, simply sat there and hurt. A couple of days later, Wendy spotted Corey's social media post. He posed in front of a newly sold house, smiling for the camera, celebrating another real estate. The comment section overflowed with praise from local clients and former classmates. To most of the town, he remained the charming, successful guy next door. None of that online polish changed what he had. Yet she could not make the whole world see behind the facade. She practiced grounded responses in it, for the possibility they crossed paths again. No screaming, no dramatic public speeches. Just clear, honest statements of how his actions affected her. She refused to hate him, refused to give him material to paint her as unhinged. Peace for herself, not public victory, became her. Lila got a few days off from hospital shifts and came over to Wendy's. They ordered takeout, sprawled across the living room couch, and talked through everything. Lila worried Wendy was letting Corey off easy, but she respected the new direction Wendy. You don't know it, Lila said, picking food. But don't let him pretend he did nothing wrong if he shows up. She was not giving him. She was releasing her desperate need for him to at fault. Forgiveness and letting go of your own obsession were two very different. Midweek, Carter texted her. Several former classmates who had witnessed Corey's bullying over the years had reached out to him privately. They did not want to start a big online drama, but they confirmed the pattern of cruelty stretched across multiple high. A quiet, unorganized group of people in truth, even if they would not stage some grand public. Wendy. She would not get a satisfying viral moment. There would be no public reckoning played out for the whole alumni network to witness. Most people would continue liking Corey's posts and doing business with him. That really stung, but it was reality. One afternoon, while walking through the downtown shopping district, Wendy half expected to run into Corey around every. She steeled herself confrontation, rehearsing her. Never appeared. The waiting itself wore on her nerves. She realized she was still mentally racing for him, still letting him occupy space inside. She sat on a park bench, watching parents chase small children. A soft autumn breeze stirred the tree leaves. She breathed deep. Her healing could not keep waiting for his next move. She needed to start living as if he no longer had that weight over her, whether he realized or not. Still, she knew if they met face to face, she would speak her truth calmly. She would not beg him to understand. But she wondered whether Corey, so invested in his unlikable image, would ever allow her to have that quiet, unemotional final word without twisting it into something else. A few days later, Wendy's phone pinged late in the evening. It was a direct message from Corey, popping up in her alumni social media inbox. She hesitated before opening it, her shoulders tensing. "Hey, Wendy. I've been thinking about the reunion. I hate that things got so awkward. We were all kids back then. I hope you can try to see it for what it was. Dumb high school banter. I don't want bad blood between us. Feels like you're holding on to something way out of proportion." Wendy read the message twice. There was no real remorse. No acknowledgement of the long-term harm. Only a request for her to drop her hurt so he could keep his clean-cut reputation intact. He wanted her to absorb the discomfort, so he would not have to. She did not reply right away. Instead, she set the phone face down on her kitchen counter and walked away. She remembered the lines she had practiced. She would not argue, would not try to convince him he was wrong. There was no point changing a mind that refused to shift. The next morning, several private messages trickled in. More former classmates reached out to Wendy. Each of them shared small, painful memories, cruel jokes, offhand jabs, moments Corey had mocked them to win laughs. None of them wanted public drama, but they wanted her to know she was not alone. Some of them had never told anyone about those moments until now. Wendy sat at her dining room table and read every message. These people had carried quiet wounds of their own, buried under nostalgia and small-town politeness. Their solidarity warmed her, yet it also weighed. So much unnecessary pain, all for Corey's teenage social. Carter texted her later that same. He told her the alumni group chat had grown. Corey had been posting long, subtle paragraphs framing himself as the victim of unfair resistance. Carter had been posting a short, factual account of what unfolded at the reunion. He did not hurl insults, just laid out what he had seen. Almost immediately, pushback. Some old classmates accused him of stirring up old drama, but a handful of others replied privately to Carter, confirming Corey's history of. Slowly, quietly, people began to push back against Corey's preferred version of the past. He could not control every story anymore. His polished public image started to develop small, unavoidable. Corey saw Carter. He fired off an irritated DM to Carter, complaining he was taking sides and ruining old. Carter never did. Wendy told Lila everything over a dinner. Lila was relieved other people waking up, but she warned Wendy not to mistake quiet private support for full public. "Most folks still won't say any loud," Lila said, stabbed her salad. "They like doing business with Corey. They don't want to pick a fight with a well-connected local real estate agent. Private is real, but it is not the same as everyone." Wendy knew her friend was right. There would be no public takedown. Corey would keep clients, keep most of his friends. He would carry on with his whole life. That stung. But she had already stopped banking her peace all. Still, the DM from Corey lingered. Part of her wanted to fire back, to lay out every scar his words had left, to make him feel even a fraction of what she felt. That urge was tempting. But she knew a fiery reply would feed into the narrative he was building. Bitter, over Wendy, unable to let it rest. A short response. "I know what happened, and I know it affected me. I am not interested in rehashing this over messages. Please do." Then she closed the conversation and fell. She would not give him more space in such a digital life. Even so, she could not have world. They lived in a small town. Coffee shops, grocery stores, community events, collision of time. She'd block him online, but she could not erase the possibility of running face-to-face into him. Autumn sunlight slanted through those. Wendy folded laundry, but her thoughts kept drifting meeting. Online battles were over. Whatever remained would happen in person. And when it did, there would be no screen to hide behind. Saturday mid-morning, the downtown coffee shop hummed with weekend customers. Steam curled above mugs, the clink of ceramic and low chatter filling the air. Wendy had come to grab a latte before running weekend errands. She stood waiting near the pickup counter, scrolling idly on her phone, when she heard his voice. Corey stood only a few feet away, ordering at the register. He wore casual weekend attire, chatting easily with the barista, slipping back into his charming public persona. His gaze drifted and landed straight on Wendy. For a heartbeat, his smile faded. He had not expected to run into her here. He finished placing his order, turned, and walked toward her. No way to slip away without drawing eyes. The small shop was too crowded, tables packed, people moving slowly between them. "Wendy," Corey said. His tone was measured, attempting warmth, though tension sat underneath. "Funny running into you again. I got your message." Wendy slipped her phone into her crossbody bag, her breathing steady. She had rehearsed this moment many times in her head. She would not yell. She would not beg for remorse. She would simply state her truth and then step away. "I figured you'd," Wendy answered calmly. Corey shifted his weight, glancing around the busy room. He clearly wanted to manage this interaction so no bystanders would witness an ugly scene. He leaned in a little, voice low. "Look, I don't want bad blood. That reunion night got blown way out of proportion. I feel like you're holding on to something that happened when we were kids. Can't we just move past it?" It was the same old pattern. Shift responsibility. Minimize him. Pressure her to absolve him for his own Moving past it doesn't mean pretending it never did, Wendy said, keeping her voice level for only him to hear. "At that graduation dinner, you publicly mocked my body for cheap love. That moment shaped years of how I saw myself. I asked you not to repeat that joke at the reunion and you did it anyway. That is not something I can casually Corey's jaw tightened. The polite mask began. "I never intended to wreck your life. It was just table banter. Everyone else. People laughing doesn't make okay," Wendy replied. "Lots of kids got hurt by your joke then. I'm not here to make you feel bad. I just need you to understand the real-world cost." He stared at her, searching for some crack in her, looking for anger or tears he could twist into overaction. But Wendy calm. No voice, no dramatic. There was nothing for him to say. He let out a frustrated breath. "Sounds like nothing I say is ever going to do." "That's right," Wendy plainly. "I don't need you to satisfy me. I finally stopped waiting for your apology. I just want you to leave me alone." At that moment, Carter walked through the coffee shop front door. He spotted immediately. He did not storm over to intervene, did not get a spectacle. He simply paused near the entrance, positioned himself where he could see them. Quiet backup, letting Wendy own this conversation. Corey noted arrive. His shoulders further. He knew Carter would not stand by aggressive. He glanced back at Wendy, and for a second Wendy wondered if she might see even a flicker. There was none. Only irritation that she refused to play along with his. The barista called Corey's name. "Ready." He has more second. "Fine, I'll leave you be," he muttered. He turned, grabbed a drink from the counter, and walked out the glass front door. The bell above the door jingled as he exited. The tension drained. She exhaled a long been holding. Hers trembled faintly, but she had held her ground. She had told him exactly what actions had done, and she had him to care. Passed over to her. "Care face. You all right?" he asked. Wendy nodded. "I'm okay." He still doesn't get it. Him too. Her own latte was called out. She stepped forward to take the warm syrup to her hands. The cough against her cheeks. The confrontation was over. She had gotten no heartfelt apology, no admission of guilt, but she had said her piece, and she had her own terms. Still, as she sipped her drink, she understood this was her wounds. Closing the chapter with Corey did not instantly erase 10 years of ingrained shame. That healing would take far more time, but for the first time, the weight was not sitting quite so heavy on her shoulders. The autumn days rolled slowly onward after that coffee shop encounter. Wendy no longer checked for Corey's car on the street, no longer tensed every time she stepped into a local store half expecting to see his face. The sharp urgency of conflict faded, but healing did not arrive like a sudden bright breakthrough. It unfolded in small, quiet moments. Some days the old shame still stirred. She would stand in front of her mirror and hear the echo of that dinner table insult ringing faintly in her ears. Those moments no longer spiraled into hours of self-loathing. She would pull out her well-worn notebook and talk back to that inner voice, naming where those cruel thoughts had come from. She learned to separate Corey's teenage cruelty from her own true worth. Lila came over most weekends. They cooked messy meals, watched old movies, and talked about everything except high school drama. Once, over wine on Wendy's balcony, Lila brought up Corey. Word around town was his real estate business was still thriving. He still posted polished photos online, still socialized with many of their old classmates. He had never offered any public or private apology. "It's unfair," Lila said, twisting her wine glass between her fingers. "He gets to move on without paying any real price." Wendy stared out across the neighborhood rooftop. The sunset painted soft orange streaks across the sky. "It is unfair," she agreed. But my peace can't depend on him getting what he deserves. If I wait for that, I'll be waiting forever. Carter and Wendy built a gentle, slow-burn connection. They met for walks, visited local community events, talked about work and childhood, not anchored to the trauma of high school. He never treated her like a broken person who needed fixing. He saw her as Wendy, beyond the girl humiliated at the graduation. Romance was not right. Trust grew step by step. One crisp Saturday evening, Wendy drove back toward the banquet hall where their graduation dinner and the reunion had both happened. She parked across the street, and sitting in the quiet. She thought back to that 18-year-old version of herself, burning with shame, staring down at her dinner plate while the whole table roared. That girl had believed the mockery defined her. She sat there for several minutes, letting the old memory wash over her without. The pain was still there, but it no longer had power to twist how she saw herself. She did not need to go inside. She only needed to acknowledge how far she. A week later, she cleared out a drawer in her. She grabbed the faded reunion invitation, the one that had dragged all these ghosts back into her life months. She did not tear it up. She simply dropped it into her household recycle. It was not a grand symbolic gesture. It was just. That night, she dreamed of the graduation again. The clatter of silverware, Corey's sharp words, the roar of table laughter. But in this dream, she did not bow her head and hide. Tall. She did not yell. She just looked around at the laughing faces, and then she turned and walked away of her own. When she woke in the morning, the weight she had carried for 10 years felt no. She knew triggers still come. Old wounds do not vanish completely, but they no longer got to ruins. Corey would keep living his life, untroubled. Some people in town would still buy his version of the past, that of her hands. What belonged to her was how she'd see herself. She would not let a cruel boy's cheap high school joke own any. Wendy made herself of hot coffee, walked over to her bedroom window, and morning sunlight flooded her apartment. The past was still real, but it was no longer her present.